Welcome to Sorta and Savvy, the interview series with established Christian entrepreneurs talking about how their faith impacts their business and how their business impacts their faith. I'm your host, Shelly, founder of Faith X, which helps Christian entrepreneurs like yourself connect your faith in your business with confidence. Join us right now for a video chat style interview, like grabbing a virtual coffee with a Christian business mentor. I'm here with Jon Jorgenson. That's how you pronounce it, right? Should have asked.
That is. Good work.
So Jon Jorgenson is an author, a speaker, a spoken word poet whose YouTube videos have been viewed by more than 20 million people. He partners with numerous organizations, including Awana International, Moody Bible Institute, the Willow Creek Association, and hundreds of other churches, colleges, and conferences all over the globe. His spoken word poetry provides a dynamic and creative experience that captures the imagination of audiences everywhere. As a former Broadway actor, Chicago native, and a very lucky husband, that's what it says in your bio, Jon hopes to provide a fresh and unique voice to some of life's most difficult and challenging questions. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Right. So I want to start off by asking you what made you so excited? Because in your email to me, I pitched the show. I said, do you want to be on it? And you were like, yes, I'd love to. And you just seemed really excited. So what was it about it?
Yeah, so I always love an opportunity to connect with anyone who is trying to intersect faith with anything that you normally wouldn't intersect faith with, right? I am very passionate about ministry being done not just within the four walls of a church, but outside of the church, whether that be in the business world, the entertainment world, whatever the restaurant world, whatever it might be. And that's something that I try and do every day, is a intersection of faith and art and creativity and communication, as well as business. And so when I heard sort of what you were doing, that whole concept and idea really resonates with what I'm passionate about. And so that got me pretty excited.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. And it is very exciting. Like I could tell from that email, I was like, whoa, this guy is like really into this. So that was great. I was very excited for this interview. So you mentioned that you're in Chicago, and you said that, all these things like Broadway actor, you do a lot of media things. Chicago is not exactly where I would think of for like media personality. I normally think of like LA and that kind of thing. So can you tell me a little bit about does that impact you at all, like living in Chicago versus somewhere else?
Not necessarily, other than the fact that Chicago is where I grew up. And so a big part of what I do in terms of a lot of it is what most people would consider freelance work, right? Whether it's partnering with a church to help them write a creative element for their Easter service, or it's helping them produce a video series, or it's going to speak at a local college. So much of that is based on the connections and your network of people, right, that you know. And because for me, Chicago is where I grew up, I had a lot of those connections already made. And so that was really an easy place for me to sort of launch that sort of ministry and continue to just deepen those connections and widen that sort of network of people whom I know and who I can work with. And so Chicago just kind of seemed like a natural place for me to do that. And it's where I lived, and it's where my family is. And so, yeah. Nice.
So did you have all of that support when you were starting your business or when you were starting freelancing?
Yeah, well, the start of the business really was not really a business when it started. It was a YouTube channel that I started with a few of my friends right after college. And really, we didn't even plan on starting a YouTube channel, right? I had these poems and they had a camera, and we wanted to film them and put them up on the internet just so some people, some campers who we had been counselors of could sort of watch them, right? And at that time, I had just graduated college and I was moving to New York City to pursue being an actor. And I was working as an actor in New York City for a couple of years. And so during that time, for those whole 2 years, it was really just a hobby, something that I did on the side that I really enjoyed. It was sort of this artistic outlet in a lot of ways. And then it wasn't until about, almost 3 years ago now that we moved back to Chicago, and I decided, I would like to make this more both a ministry and a career. And how does that work? And that's when you really start to see like where that support is really coming from, because everyone will support you having a hobby so long as it's not this, self-destructive or destructive to your relationships. But when you say, I want to take this hobby and I want to try making it a career, especially a career that isn't necessarily, there's really no blueprint for sort of what I'm doing. That's when you get a lot of like puzzled looks at parties and like, so can you explain again what you do? And that sort of thing. But I get support 100% from the places that matter most, from my wife. Absolutely. From my closest friends. Absolutely. My parents, while they might not always understand what I'm doing, they support it and they believe in me. And so while I might not get overwhelming support from everywhere, I get it from the places that matter most. And that's all the fuel that I really need.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of sounds like how people approach, customers and trying to please everybody and saying your product is for everybody, your service is for everybody, versus like the actual people that you're trying to support, or the actual people you're trying to go sell to, right? Like,
yeah, that's a great
kind of
parallel.
sounds very similar to that. So when you said, you had the job and then you made this switch to something that was ministry and a career, how does that settle with you? Because a lot of people, they feel like those are not or should not be the same unless you're a pastor, right? So can you explain a little bit about that?
Right. Well, I believe that is, and I don't want to generalize, but I believe that on the whole, that really is a generational thing. For myself, I'm 26 years old. I'm right smack dab in the middle of the millennial generation, right? Whereas my parents, they grew up in a world where pretty much everything was very segmented and separate, right? You would go to work and you don't really bring your work home, right? Because you don't have this thing where you can check your email and stay working all the time, right? And then when you were at home and you went to work, you didn't bring your home stuff to work. It was, don't bother me while, dad's at work. And so everything was very segmented. Whereas for us entering the workforce, for someone who's a millennial, because of the internet and because of stuff like this, the lines start to blur, And so that's not just in our physical day-to-day schedule, that's also in how we think about our work. So no longer is a job just a way to support our family, but now a job is also a passion and a way to serve the community. It's also a way to serve God. And so for me, the idea of a job and a ministry have never been separate for me. They have always been one and the same. And one of the big reasons why I left New York and kind of left that world of being an actor was because it was a great job and I enjoyed it, but I didn't feel like it was where I was doing ministry in the strongest way. And it also wasn't allowing me sort of that autonomy or that freedom to practice meaningful ministry elsewhere while doing that job, because that's totally valid as well. If you have a job that pays the bills and is great and you don't feel like it's a ministry, but on the weekends you can go serve in church in a meaningful way or with service projects, and that's where you do your ministry, that's totally valid. But for me, that job wasn't allowing that outlet, and it also wasn't a ministry in and of itself. And so for me, I knew I sort of had to make a change.
Yeah. Were there any like second thoughts, or was this pretty much like, yeah, I feel really confident about this change and I'm just going to go and do it?
No, certainly not. There was probably a almost 6-month period where I was sort of wallowing between the two. We left New York and we moved back to Chicago, but I was still auditioning every now and then, not because I actually wanted to book a show or be doing this, but because that's what I went to school for. That's what everyone I knew expected me to do. That's what honestly felt safe at the time because I had found success in it. And this whole YouTube speaking ministry / business that I would run independently, I had never really heard of anyone who was doing that, who wasn't a pastor or, didn't go to seminary or all of those. I didn't have any of the qualifications. And so I had a lot of insecurity with diving full into it, even though I knew it's what I wanted to do. And even though I knew it's what I sort of felt called to do, if we can sort of use that phrase. And it really took someone else who has been a really good friend and sort of a mentor of mine over the years, through just a conversation with him. He's like, well, why don't you just try it? Like, why don't you just do it? And if after 24 months or 12 months or whatever it is, it doesn't work out at all, you can always go back to acting, you know? And I think and it wasn't like some profound thing he said. I think I just needed permission from someone else to just say, it's okay to try this. It's okay for you to do it. And that really meant a lot to me. And so after about 6 months of sort of wallowing of, I don't know what to do, I don't know who I am, I kind of said, okay, I'm going to try this and I'm going to fully commit to it. Because in order to give it a fair shake, I'm going to need to fully commit, you know?
So how did you fund that full commitment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So part of it was I began the classic, like, get your side hustle on, and started driving with Uber. So for the first, I would say 6 to 8 months, I would wake up at 5 a.m. and I would go and I would get in my car and I would drive Uber for the whole morning commute, 4 or 5 hours or so. And when the morning commute was done, and the morning commute here in Chicago is great to drive Uber because you got a bunch of people going to work who are tired and they have to get up at 6 for their job. So they don't really want to talk. So it's very peaceful rides. And you're always busy. So you had to get up early, but it was nice because then I was free from 10 a.m. until the rest of the day to do my work, right? And that was sitting down and really committing to writing and creating the best YouTube videos that I possibly could, but also beginning to reach out with those connections that I already had in the Chicagoland area for speaking engagements, or a lot of cold emails to, you know, church after church after conference, sending out 100 and maybe hearing back from 2. And maybe out of those 2, maybe booking 1, you know? And so there was a lot of, and still to this day, there's, you know, a way to make some consistent income that happens all the time. And I don't drive Uber anymore, but now I work with a friend of mine who has his own video production company. That's sort of my safety outlet, my sort of day job in a way. And I'll work a certain amount of hours for him per month. So I have that consistent stream of income, so that when speaking is slow and I don't have as many gigs on the calendar in a month, it doesn't break the bank, you know? I heard a couple authors recently on a podcast saying, but they were saying this separately, but both of them were New York Times bestselling authors, and they still do day jobs. One of them tutors, and the other one coaches, helps people write college essays. And they still do this, bestseller, you know, 6-figure book deals. But their reasoning for it was their art, or what they consider their passion. They don't ever want to get to the point where they put all of their financial burden on that work. And I thought that was really wise, you know, to have some sort of consistent income. And so that's sort of the system that I've worked out over the last 3 years or so. Yeah.
Sounds like a wise decision. Doesn't put as much pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it is creative work. If what you're doing as your business and as your passion, quote unquote, if it's creative work, that takes so much of you emotionally, you know, and spiritually, especially if it's ministry, quote unquote, that you don't want to add the burden on top of it of like, now I have to make a ton of money at it as well. Because then you'll start compromising and you'll start taking shortcuts and all of this stuff. But if you have a nice, consistent base, whatever that's from, then you're free to do good, specific, meaningful work rather than the work that's going to get you paid really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I liked what you said too about, you know, if we're using like the Christianese terms, like, oh, you know, you were following your calling, right?
Right.
But you still did the hard work that was necessary to make these good, how did you say it? Like to write and create the best YouTube videos you could.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you talk a little bit about that? Like maybe how you approach, you know, your calling or your passion or these things like in that ministry realm, and the idea that maybe if God has put you specifically in a certain position, he's going to like help you get, you know, the things that he wants you, like the opportunities he wants you to have. But at the same time, he's not just going to like, boom, and then you're done, right?
Totally.
Like, so can you explain how you find that balance?
Yeah, so I think there's a bit of a formula that I have found just through my own story, and then through hearing plenty of other stories from people who have, quote unquote, followed their passion or found their calling. And that formula is, first of all, what makes you angry? Or what is the problem in the world that you need to solve? The entrepreneurial term would be like scratching your own itch, that sort of thing. So what makes you angry? What injustice in the world are you like, this needs to be righted, And for me, that was that a lot of people in the church, they have one of two experiences. Either it's stuffy and boring and judgmental, or it's all just fluff and no actual substance. It's just a big show. And so for me, that was a pain point. And so that's what made me angry. Then you ask yourself, well, what am I good at? What are my skills? What gifts have I been given? Right. And for me, that's writing, that's speaking, that's performing in a certain way. And so then you ask, how do I use what I'm good at in order to make a difference in the thing that makes me angry? And part of that requires that you do work, because it means this thing that you are good at, you have to continually develop that gift. And even once that gift gets developed to the point where you're truly excellent at it, then you have to continually exercise that gift and seek to serve a certain demographic of people that you're feeling, quote unquote, called to. So while obviously I believe that this calling, whether it's mine or whether it's yours or whether it's anyone, it's not something that we can fulfill by our own strength and power. It is ultimately God who is pushing us and leading us and giving us those gifts. There is plenty of work that is required on our part. There's sort of this partnership that happens in that, and we have to take responsibility. God can give us all the gifts that he wants, but unless we actually begin to use them in a purposeful and meaningful and specific way, then what's going to happen? Nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I like that partnership idea. Like,
yeah,
okay, you can't just be a lazy bum and just sit there, right? And like, okay, God, make it happen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done, and that's really the problem, I think, for most people. It's not that they're short on passion, or it's not even that they don't know what God is calling them to do. I think if we all just kind of sat down, maybe we don't know exactly what it is specifically, but we know the general area. I like to think of it in terms of a boulder rolling down a hill. If you have this giant boulder, to get that boulder to start rolling from just like sitting there, that's really difficult. But once it gets moving, you can just keep it going because of that momentum. I think that's kind of how a calling works, is that most of us are waiting for God to get the boulder moving, and we're just sitting there. And it's hard to get something that's just static moving. But if we just start moving, start doing something, that's when we gain momentum, and that's when we gain sort of that direction.
So good. I like that analogy. Is there anything else you want to talk about on this? I mean, it's so rich. I don't want to just like switch the subject, but I did want to pick up something that you mentioned earlier. So if there's anything else that you want to add to this off the top of your head right now, we can always come back to it. But there's something else.
Let's move on. And if anything comes up, I'll just stop in the middle of a sentence and say it.
All right, sounds good. So you mentioned at the, kind of a couple of minutes ago probably, that you were wondering, one of the doubts was, were you qualified to do this kind of work, right? And I know that you have a video probably several years ago, the not qualified video. Mm-hmm. So can you explain a little bit more about how that plays into the entrepreneurial side of what you're doing? And I mean, because in the video you talk about more of the ministry side of it, right. And I'll link the video so everybody can see it. But can you talk a little bit more about the entrepreneurial side and how that comes into play?
Yeah. So like you were saying, the video kind of does talk about that ministry side of it. And the video mainly talks about this because there are many barriers to us feeling worthy or feeling qualified to do work, right? And one of those barriers often is, especially as Christians, is our past or our sin or this shame. You know, how could someone who has done X or struggled with X ever possibly do meaningful work for God, right? And that's sort of the struggle of inadequacy or unworthiness that the video tackles. So to answer your question from the entrepreneurial side and the business side of it, there is still just as much of a feeling of not being qualified, but it's for different reasons, right? It's not because of the mistakes I've made in my past necessarily, for me personally, but it's rather because of the voices in my head that say, you didn't go to school for this. You don't know, you didn't go to school both for quote unquote ministry. You didn't go to seminary. You also didn't go to school for business, you know? So you didn't go to school for this. No one else is really doing anything like this. You know, there's no one that you can follow. You're too young. You don't have enough knowledge, right? You're not, like, all of these sort of what Steve Pressfield in War of Art calls the resistance, right? It's all of these voices in our head that try and tell us anything that they can to make us feel as though we're not qualified, or maybe we don't even deserve to have the autonomy or the lifestyle or whatever it is that we are trying to get to by being an entrepreneur or a business owner, that we don't even deserve that for one reason or another. And so that is the type of struggle that I think I continually face every day. And to answer maybe your question a little bit more specifically in terms of like how to fight that or how to get over that, I certainly don't know how, but I do know how not to fight it. And one way I tried to fight it for a long time was to take my successes as proof that I was worthy. So, oh, they booked me for a gig to go and speak at this large youth conference. Therefore, I am worthy of this work, which is great. And it does provide some proof. But what happens when 4 months go by and no one books me? Well, then I go right back into this cycle of feeling unworthy of it and all of that. And so while I don't necessarily know how to get over those feelings of inadequacy, and I don't even know if any of us ever do, I know that purely leaning on success or the approval of other people is not the way to truly heal that sickness of inadequacy. It will medicate the symptoms for a little while, which feels good and sometimes is worth it, but it certainly doesn't provide healing in the way that we really want. You know, I think the healing is more of a part of a longer journey of discovering things like, I have discovered that my work doesn't define me. You know, it is something I do. It's not who I am. And so if it doesn't go well, or if a bunch of people don't view my newest video, it doesn't change how valuable or important I am as a person, you know? And those, so I think to sort of simplify this, it's putting that worth or that value of yourself in things that do not change, rather than in the approval of others or how much money you're making, because those things are constantly changing.
Mm-hmm. So going off of that, just kind of to further maybe the applications of this, mm-hmm. because I think, like you said, that's probably like the cure, right? the getting to the root of the issue.
Yeah.
While people are getting there, there are other things, like there's real life happening, and you can't always be like, no, don't introduce me with all my stuff. Like that's just kind of tripping me up right now, right? So like, how, and maybe it comes into play this, the humility idea and the false humility and like arrogance and how much we're taking on those things as part of who we are, like you said, and what we can do and like how we approach those situations. Do you have any thoughts on the idea of like, you know, social proof and trying to explain yourself and trying to go in like, you know what you're doing, and like the fake it till you make it attitude that is really prevalent in entrepreneurship?
Totally. So I think there's a couple things there. One, from like a business owner side of things and from a networking side of things, obviously we want to present ourselves with confidence, you know, and as a professional, you know, and there, I think there's a difference between, you know, being false and flat out lying and being confident, you know, just as there is a difference between being humble and giving too much information about whatever struggles you're going through, you know? And so I think that's on the other side of it. You know, we just talked about these feelings of inadequacy, these, you know, all of these things. There's also a certain confidence that we as business owners or freelancers or whatever it is, that we need to walk into our interactions with our clients or with our customers with, you know, that, hey, I believe in the work that I do, you know, and while certainly I'm not the biggest person in the world or, you know, right now, or the most successful, I believe that I do good work. And I believe that whatever your problem is, my business, or for me, it's, you know, me as a speaker or me as a freelancer, I can solve that for you in a really great way, you know? And so I think that's another place where you have to give yourself permission, right? You have to give yourself permission to not necessarily self-promote, but to self-describe in a confident way, you know, and that's a difficult permission to give yourself. And it's also a skill to do in a way that isn't off-putting and isn't totally arrogant, but also is truthful and enticing, right? Because you want that person who is across from you, that client, to book you and to work with you. And so that's a delicate balance that I am definitely still learning how to do. And the only way to get better at it that I've learned is by practicing it, right? And a great way to practice it without the fear of, to give like a really practical piece of advice, a great way that I found to practice it without the fear of like losing business is to do, I don't necessarily like this word, but to do like networking lunches or coffee with people who you don't necessarily think you're going to work with them right now. You know, one of my big goals for this year is just to do more meetups with people who are in the similar speaking world, or maybe they work for a church or this or that. And there are many reasons for doing that. But one of them is so that when they ask me what I do, I can practice that pitch of, here's what I do, without the fear of them being like, well, now we're not going to use you, you know, because I'm just telling a friend or I'm just telling an acquaintance, here's what I do. So I think the more you can practice that and the more you can sort of hone that quote unquote elevator pitch or whatever it is, and the more you can refine the language that you use when you talk about your business or what you offer or what you do, the better it's going to be. You know, the better it's going to be for you and the more it's going to help you moving forward.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Thanks. I remember somebody telling me one time that you have to practice your elevator pitch, like every version of your elevator pitch, like 100 times before you actually get to the point where it's natural instead of memorized.
Totally.
And I was just like, wow, that's a lot. Because every time you practice it, you're like, oh no, I got to change that thing. Like that didn't sound like me. Mm-hmm. So you got to start your count all over again, right?
Right. And even that, it's like you practice it with yourself. And then there's a whole nother version of practicing it in front of other people. Because have you heard of StoryBrand?
Yeah.
Right. So StoryBrand is this whole, for those of you who don't know, who are listening perhaps or watching, StoryBrand is this whole idea that when I ask you like, what do you do? Instead of saying, well, I do video production, you tell them what you do by telling them a short, quick story, right? And so my version of that is kind of what I told you a little while ago. A few years ago, started to notice people have one of two versions when they go to church. It's really hard to dive into that story without it like sounding like a canned, memorized speech, you know? And the first dozen times that I did that with people, it sounded just like that, you know? And still to some extent, maybe it does sometimes. And so there is the whole like memorizing and crafting and figuring out what is the proper word or verb or this. And then there's the actual application of it in an authentic and generous way to where it's not listened about me for 20 minutes, you know? So it's tough. It's definitely tough.
Yeah, definitely. So in a similar topic, and again, slightly different, but related, I think, in a lot of ways when we're talking about being not qualified or practicing what we can do, the topic of comparison and the feelings of comparison come up a lot.
Yeah.
So like people will say like, oh, I don't feel qualified for this. And the second piece of that that's missing but not said usually is because there are so many other people who are more qualified than me.
Yeah.
Right? It's this comparison. And maybe without them, we wouldn't have really thought about like, am I qualified to do this thing or not?
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit more about comparison specifically, and like, how do you feel that maybe you don't, maybe you just like such a confident person that you never compare yourself to anybody ever, and that's right.
Yeah. That's right. You're right. So next question, please.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for your time. That's all we have.
Of course. No, that's absolutely real. While I talked about earlier how doing an independent speaking YouTube ministry, whatever you want to call it, that is something that not a lot of people are doing. There are a lot of people who have YouTube channels. There are a lot of people who are speakers, So while there's not a lot of people who are doing this unique mix of things that I do, each individual element of it has so many opportunities to compare myself to this speaker or that YouTuber or their view count or their subscriber count or whatever it is. There are so many opportunities to do that, especially when so much of my business has to do with, for lack of a better term, promotion of myself and subscriber count and follower count and all of those things. There are so many quantifiable numbers that don't actually mean anything that are very easy to get caught up in and compare. And perhaps a sort of unique way that I have found to attack comparison is by actually doubling down on your own work. And what I mean by that is when you really dive into your own work, for me, it would be just really seeking to become a better, more effective Bible communicator. And when I double down on that, what happens is not only do I get better at my craft, but I begin to discover what is it specifically about me as a Bible communicator that I'm best at, right? Because there's the guy out there as the Bible communicator who is so high energy and incredibly just inspiring, and people are on their feet clapping every time they preach. Then there's the Bible communicator who blows you away with how smart they are and just how much they know. Then there's the Bible communicator that has just incredibly heartfelt stories that you just cry every time, And when you look at these people who are the best in any industry or in any business, what they have done is they have found, what do we do within this niche that makes us unique and better than anyone else, right? Adidas has found that again with being a sports brand that is very nostalgic, right? They have it's sports, but it's athletics, but it's sort of this like fringe creative, it's for the creative athletic, right? So they've sort of found within that whole realm where there's Nike and there's Under Armour and there's all these competitors, they have found what makes us uniquely different from all of them, which then begins to free you from comparison. Because while I am a speaker and he is a speaker and she is a speaker, they don't do what I do specifically. But the problem is that we spend so much time comparing ourselves as just a general speaker or a general photographer or whatever it is, your business, instead of diving really intensely into the work of our own craft and discovering what makes us specifically unique. And once you find, because really what you'll do if you dive deep enough, you'll find out that you are the only person who does that thing. And when you're in a category of one, you can't compare. There's no more
you're the best.
Right. You are, because you're the only one who does it. And so that strangely enough, it's like the easy way to say it is the best way to avoid comparing yourself to other people is to focus on yourself. But it's a little bit more specific than that, right? It's really digging in and figuring out, where am I a category of one within this larger category? And then it frees me to do me as well as I can do it. And I'm also the best thing about that perhaps is I'm also able to watch another speaker or another YouTuber do what they do specifically well, and I can appreciate it and I can encourage them in it without feeling that jealousy. And that's an incredible place to reach. And I don't mean that I have reached it. I mean that I'm sort of on my way, and I felt glimpses of it. So
speaking from perfection, you have already,
yes, exactly.
Now you can speak down to all these people coming back.
Yeah, speaking from an enlightened place.
It's just coming to mind that this verse about, we are all one body, but we all have different functions.
Absolutely.
And we can't all be ears or we can't all be eyes, right? And that's the verse that's coming to mind, is that I just see this really practical application to business versus like just the church as like the spiritual body of God. But I think it's more than just the church or the spiritual body of God, because we're still living in this world that, business is a part of. So
and to get it even like more specific than that, it's like the verse talks about like a hand is not a foot and things like that, but also like the index finger, while it's part of the hand, is not the ring finger, which is not the thumb. And I think that almost even more is what we're talking about in business. It's like all of these are fingers, but this has a different function than this, and there's something that makes this one uniquely different from this one, and that's what frees us from comparison. Oh gosh, we're all, whatever your business, we're all selling t-shirts online, but what makes this t-shirt company totally different from this one? That's what frees us from that comparison.
Definitely. So speaking of Bible verses that have come up, I mean, there's so much stuff here. I'm like, I don't know which thing to pick up now. So we're already on the topic of Bible verses, sort of. So we'll go with that one. So are there any other Bible verses that you've felt kind of come alive as you've been doing your freelance work and as you've been growing in the last 2 years?
Yeah, for sure. Something that I return to time and time again is a very classic Proverbs 3, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make the path straight. Because with entrepreneurship or with solopreneurship or whatever it is you want to call it, there is a certain amount, there's a ridiculous amount of uncertainty sometimes, and there is a wonderful amount of really not being able to see sometimes more than 2 steps ahead, or even 1 step ahead, or even you can't even see the next step. And I sort of view that verse as, we're walking along this path and it's just thick fog right in front of us, and we can't even see where that next step is. And that, like we were talking about earlier, it is up to us to do that work and to take those steps. But then there's this beautiful marriage and partnership again between us doing the work and at the same time that we are trusting that God is leading us along the right path or his path in it. So it's this intense commitment to do that work while at the same time releasing all of it and trusting that God is going to make it fruitful or lead us down whatever his will might be for us. And so that is like that verse has always been a constant reminder to not only continue to persevere, but just as much continue to trust. And that perseverance and trust marriage and the give and take between those two things is the ebb and flow of my life every day, Yeah.
Thanks. Trying to figure out how many other questions I want to stick in the rest of the time that we have here.
Go for it. Whatever.
Let's go back to the comparison. And I didn't warn you ahead of time that I was going to ask this. So I don't know if, like, as you're saying, like, oh yeah, this is really something I'm working on, and it's going to be like, and now I'm going to compare you. But I'm gonna like make myself feel better about it because you kind of like made the comparison yourself early on. And that was to Casey Neistat. And for those of you who don't know, Casey Neistat is this pretty big YouTuber who has a very distinct style. He's a blogger. And so when you first started, your style was very heavily modeled after Casey's. And then now, I mean, I've definitely seen this progression of kind of your own style and like finding what people say, like finding your voice, right? Like finding who you are. Can you explain a little bit more about that and like going from like a self comparison and a model, right? Because kind of the same thing, to like where you are now.
Yeah. So I think where we're flowing now is almost into this idea of like comparison versus influence, and copying versus modeling, right? And I have somewhat of a controversial opinion in terms of modeling yourself or copying off of someone. Whereas for me, and this comes from, this comes from the influences that I have had as a creative person. When you are first starting out something and you have been inspired by someone, I have no problem with you, to an extent, copying what they do. And there's plenty of people who have listened to some of my spoken word poetry and they send me like their poems that they've written. And it's not word for word or anything like that, but the structure and the way that they do it, it's a blatant copy of sort of this version of it that I have crafted for myself. But for me to get angry or upset about that, I find kind of foolish and a bit hypocritical. One, because one of the big reasons that I do the work I do is to inspire other people to begin to use their gifts. And two, the style that I have crafted, whether it's as a spoken word artist, whether it's as a vlogger, which you were talking about with the Casey stuff, or whether it's as a speaker and a preacher, really all it is me as a spoken word artist. It's a combination of 3 other performers or poets that I love, and I have combined all 3 of their styles to come up with my own sort of version of it. Same with filmmaking or vlogging. It's a mix between, Casey and this person and that person and this director, and that has sort of converged to become what I do. And if you watch Casey enough, you'll hear him say like his style is the same way. So there's just this like constant flow of, we are all sort of the weird, odd child of 4 or 5 creators that their styles and their voices have mixed together to create us and what we do. And I think that's something that's so beautiful about art or even business or creativity, is that there is no artist out there, there's no writer, there's no musician who was not first influenced by someone else and in some way is copying what someone else has already done. There is nothing truly unique in that way, and a lot of people would say that sounds cynical. I actually think that's beautiful, because then what you get to do is you get to trace back, right? You get to be like, man, I really love, John's blog. Well, guess what? You're going to love Seth Godin then, because he in part inspired my blog. You love Seth Godin? Guess what? You're going to love Stephen Pressfield. You love Stephen Press, and you get to trace it back and find all these other people who inspire the people you love, and I think that's kind of a beautiful thing. And then to draw it back to comparison, most of the time when you're influenced by someone, it's someone you respect, and it's someone who is probably further along in their journey than you. And that is a ridiculous comparison to make. Like, don't compare yourself to your heroes or your idols or anything like that, because they're further along in the journey, and they have reached a place that you perhaps will reach one day. And also they're probably not that much more confident in what they're doing than you are still. They're people just like you are. And so that sort of comparison game, again, is just sort of a fruitless endeavor, I have found.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And you mentioned, there's many influences. The reason I picked Casey, in part, is because, you were very blanket about giving him like, hey, I am heavily influenced by this guy. But also because, go ahead.
That's an important thing that I left out, was that there's a difference. I think a big difference between copying and being influenced by is, do you give that person credit, right? Is it an homage to them? Are you grateful for it? Or are you claiming that this is your own thing, right? Because that's almost foolish in a way, and I'm very open to, who has influenced me as a speaker. It is a mix between, X person, and X person. Totally. And if you watch all 3 of them, you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, So I think that's important as well, that willingness and that self-awareness to be like, it was influenced by these people, you know, and I'm grateful to them for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and thanks for explaining that. I think that's a very good distinction. So the reason I brought it up though was because I had read something. I was kind of like, okay, how do other people describe you? And one of the things that I found was this description that you are the Christian Casey Neistat. And again, that was from the early stuff, right? But it made me think about, having the Christian label on something is not necessarily a good thing. And typically, only people who are like really, really Christian kind of like that Christian label. I mean, when you think about like Christian movies and Christian music and other things like that, for a lot of people, it just means the clean but less good version of whatever it is.
Totally.
So can you explain what the implications of that label and the connotations of that label are when it comes to being a Christian entrepreneur, a Christian freelancer?
Yeah, totally. So this is a constant battle and debate that exists in my head every single day, because we live in a culture where to tag my videos or to label myself as a Christian YouTuber helps me in terms of people who would enjoy my content would be searching for that type of thing. And unfortunately, we live in a Christian culture who, if you label something as Christian, then all of a sudden people feel safe with like trusting it for some reason, you know? But on the other side of it, I totally agree with you. And in terms of, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. In fact, oftentimes it means it's the less good version of something else. And so I have this incredible aversion to ever using this, I'm a Christian spoken word artist, I am a Christian YouTuber, I have this incredible aversion to it, because like, what does that even mean? You know? And I'm always like, why can't I just be a spoken word artist who happens to be a Christian and whose faith, just like my relationships, just like my upbringing, it all has a heavy influence on what I do, you know? And that was something, honestly, that I struggled with a little bit more back when, because honestly, and this is diving into perhaps a whole nother thing, but over the last several years of doing this sort of business and this ministry, it has evolved in terms of how I describe myself, right? Because at first I was an artist, first and foremost, right? I was, and a lot of that like Christian Casey Neistat stuff came from like when I was vlogging a lot, which I don't really vlog that much anymore. And I was mainly known for spoken word poetry, and that's what I loved doing. I thought of myself more as a performer and an artist. Whereas over the last several years, it is sort of molded and changed into now really I think of myself first and foremost as a communicator and a teacher, you know? And sometimes I do that in a very artistic way. But if you watch the majority of the videos I come out with now, it's much more like me teaching or communicating a passage from the Bible. And in that, I don't really struggle with the Christian label as much, because what am I going to say? I'm a Christian Bible communicator. Like when you say I'm a Bible communicator or I'm a preacher or, you know, whatever it is, that sort of takes care of the Christian connotation. But yeah, I wish it was a label that I didn't ever have to use, because I don't want to lump myself into the dumbed down version of art or creativity that it so often connotates. But unfortunately, it is a label that we still sort of have to use, but I use it sparingly. And anytime I can, I try my best to move us forward in that sort of conversation. But unfortunately, a lot of people are very averse to anything that doesn't label itself as Christian.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get to the very last couple of questions, I'm going to do a little speed round.
Go for it.
Okay. So, it's a little harder than the typical, like, what's your favorite snack? So just be ready for it. Okay.
Okay. Wow. Here we go.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
All right. One thing that you wish Christians knew about entrepreneurship.
That it's okay to do it, and it's not self-glorifying when it's done correctly.
Mm-hmm. The best advice you've ever received?
To take all advice with a grain of salt, meaning don't listen to everybody.
Okay, that's wise. Favorite part about being both a Christian and an entrepreneur?
The fact that my faith gets to influence everything that I do, meaning that I believe that the work that I'm doing is the most important work that I could possibly give myself to. It's about so much more than making a living, making money, or anything like that. And it's also even about more than just helping other people. You know, it is about the greatest call that any of us could ever have, which is to help build God's kingdom here on earth. That's the best.
Mm-hmm. And what's the most challenging part about being both a Christian and an entrepreneur?
This is very much a personal challenge that I'm fighting right now. And I don't even know if the entrepreneur side of it really falls into this. It does because of my business, right? It's having compassion and empathy for Christians that I disagree with or who disagree with me and the way that I do things. That's my struggle right now. I have no problem with having compassion and loving people who are non-believers or non-Christians, like no problem most of the time. But when it comes, there's a lot, especially being a quote unquote public figure, as small as it is in the online world, like Christians can sometimes be real nasty to each other online when we're talking about, you know, different things that we believe or how my church does it versus how your church does it. And after, you know, I've had a YouTube channel for 4 years. After 4.5 years of comments about the way that my wife was baptized as an adult, or this or that was wrong or sinful, like that's, you know, it knocks you down a peg. And so I have sort of gotten to this place where I'm a little bit jaded almost towards the structure of organized Christian religion and community. And so one of my big prayers moving into this year is for God to really increase my compassion for people of the same faith as me, who perhaps I disagree with, and who voice that opinion in a way that I don't think is very considerate or kind. So,
right. Yeah, that's a good prayer, and hard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, just for fun, your favorite cliche phrase that Christian entrepreneurs say?
I don't even know what do Christian entrepreneurs say? I have no idea.
How about Christians in general?
Well, this is me being jaded again. This whole idea, this phrase that says, God will never give you anything you can't handle. That is a twisted version of a verse that is kind of a version of a verse that is in the Bible, except like that doesn't make any sense to me, because if God always gave us things we could handle, what would we need him for? You
right.
know, like that to me says like, you can do it by yourself. You're fine. Which that again is just nitpicking. And I understand the heart behind the phrase that God's actually going to be the one that brings you through it. But I think it kind of conveys the wrong message.
Yeah.
And also people say it when like their son or daughter or their dad has died and they show up to the funeral and like, God won't give you anything you can't handle. And I would punch them in the face if they said that to me. You know what I mean? Like just say, I'm sorry and move on. Oh.
Yeah. It's definitely, we're not always the most kind and thoughtful people, are we?
No. Yeah. Especially when you use God as like well, you shouldn't be sad about this because God has a plan. It's like, yeah, but like I can still be sad. I can still mourn.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when we use Jesus as like an ointment rather than like the truly healing agent, that becomes a problem. And that's what makes people oftentimes very averse to the faith, is like we think that Jesus is just like a medication to cover symptoms. to make us feel better in the moment, but it actually is the healing agent that we need for everything in our souls. And to just be like, well, God has a reason for this, is to totally shortchange his whole power and redemptive plan for our lives. So get off my soapbox now. And
No, that's okay. I mean, this whole interview is basically about you and what you think. So, yeah. All right. Are you ready for the last couple of questions?
Oh, yes, I am, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So what is something that you're working on that you're very excited about and you want to tell the viewers?
Yeah. So something that I'm working on that I'm very excited about. Well, here's something that I just finished working on that I'm very excited about. I have a spoken word album that actually came out today as we're recording this. It's called Faith. Thank you. It's called Faith Journey. And it's a collaboration between myself and Common Man Music, who does now for the last year and a half, has done all of the music for my spoken word videos. And the album is made up of 5 spoken word poems that are already on my channel, and then 5 brand new, never before heard poems. And so we've been working on that for a while now. It's the first time that I've put out an actual album of my work rather than just like throw up the MP3s for my YouTube videos. And so I'm excited about that, and I'm proud of sort of the work that he has done, and the music tracks that he's put behind them are really, really good. And so it's been a fun collaboration. So much of the work that I do is just me and my computer and my camera. So it's really refreshing to be able to work with somebody and collaborate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there an easy way to access that, or should I just get the link from you? And
yeah, it's everywhere music is sold. So whether that's Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, Apple Music, it's everywhere. It's called Faith Journey.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
And then lastly, is there a question that you thought I would ask but didn't, or something else you really want to say, like your final thought to Christian entrepreneurs who are watching?
That's a good question.
It kind of makes it sound like you're dying or something. What is your final thought?
What is my final thought? I'll say, oh my gosh, I'm probably just putting way too much weight on this. I would say that something, again, and this might be a generational thing, but something that I believe in the world we live in today is that there really is no difference between ministry and career. And now, like we said earlier, that you might work in a bank and you don't see how that can be a ministry. I personally do. And I think we all owe it to ourselves, and especially as entrepreneurs and business owners or solopreneurs, to really dig in and see where are the ministry opportunities in this work that I do. Even if it's like, I never saw the ministry opportunities in vlogging, because it's utterly, just self-promotional, right? Like, watch what I do every day, and I struggled with that for a really long time until I started having conversation after conversation with people who would come up to me at a conference and say, hey, I was going through a really tough time a couple of years back, and I found you and your wife's vlog, and it was like the one bright spot in my day sometimes when I could go and watch it. And I was like, oh, God can use anything as a ministry opportunity, especially when we enter into it with that heart and with that hope. And so I think we all owe it to not only ourselves, but to the customers and the community that we serve, and also to the God that we serve, to ask ourselves, where's the ministry opportunity here? And that doesn't mean we all have to be Tom's Shoes necessarily, which isn't even a quote unquote Christian company. But even if it's just the way that you deal with your customers day in and day out, the way that you engage in customer service, man, if I could have a great customer service experience, that would be incredible, wouldn't it? So yeah, that's what I would say.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate your time.
No, of course. And thank you for doing this. Like I said, there's not something I also believe is that there are not enough people who are taking the ideas that God places in their head and putting hands and feet and words to them. And so you are in the minority and you're doing important, really good work. So good job.
Thank you. And I think that can go to all of the people watching too, probably. Just that, you are actually taking action on something that God's put in your heart. So
yeah,
thank you very much for watching as well. And we will see you later. Bye. Hey there. Thanks for watching this episode of Sword and Savvy. Be sure to comment with one thing that you liked best about this video and check out the other episodes in this series. Also, if you have any suggestions for other people who you'd like to see on the show, drop their name in the comments and let me know some of the questions that you would ask them if you had the chance. See you soon.